Scarbs, it's difficult to know where to go after McLaren because I suppose, I don't know, Alfa Romeo Sauber wouldn't be a bad place to go next to look at their season. Bit inconsistent. Flashes of speed periodically.
Yeah, they looked like they were very well prepared for the season. They were very quick in the early part of the season with that slightly odd side pod concept. It was very similar to the Aston Martin kind of fully undercut side pod. They've even quicker than Aston changed that to a kind of makeshift change to I wouldn't call it a Red Bull-esque, but it was more trying to shape the airflow in a similar way. But I got the feeling that they just ran out of gas too early in the season. Whether that means that they're trying to create something fantastic for 23, I don't know. But certainly they didn't seem to sort of take a leap on at any point during the year. Kind of lacked any updates. The car looked very much the same and was quick, at certain times, at certain points in races and in practice, you'd suddenly see Bottas or Zhou come up, but never consistently enough to think.
But that wouldn't be budget cap related, would it? I mean, they wouldn't have just got it so wrong that they massively overspent in the first time. Do you think that's what it was?
A sensitive car that they couldn't engineer the sensitivity out of, I guess, would be the answer to the, the why that was the case. I don't know, because if any team, there's a few teams out there that do really well on no budgets, and Sauber, Alfa Romeo have long since been one of those teams in their various guises over the years. So it's strange. Well,
that's an interesting point, though, because does that mean that if you've got a really good tunnel, as we know Sauber, Alfa Romeo have, that you can get the number you want in terms of downforce versus drag, but can they also dial in a number which comes under the heading of drivability, large sweet spot? Is that something that you can they think of, or are they only thinking in terms of peaks?
Oh no, there are metrics, there's curves that they'll look at in terms of how a car is sensitive. But I think you've got
how sensitive it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean how big is the sweet spot. It's a difference, a subtle difference.
Yeah, but again, it's what they're looking for in that data, and I don't think their problem was necessarily purely because you talk about wind tunnel performance there. I don't think there was any issue with that. I don't think it came on enough through the year compared with other teams. But I think there's lots of other aspects to engineering a race car. So it's tyres and suspension, how you deal with porpoising, strategy and everything else that gets the car going. Fundamentally, the car was good, but they just couldn't always get the best out of it on any particular weekend or any particular lap in the race. And I think that is really what held them back. Which makes it very hard to predict where they go next year, because we'll know the car will be fundamentally quite good. Now we hear that teams like Haas and Alfa Romeo have got the budget to actually fully utilise the wind tunnel and CFD testing that they're allowed. Certainly this year or last year, maybe they didn't. They had so many hours, but they just didn't have the money to run that. Because
even though they own their own tunnel.
It is, because you think you've got to run the tunnel, and energy is expensive. You've got to have the people.
Relative to Formula One budget cap numbers?
Yeah,
really?
I mean, you actually have a wind tunnel of its own energy substation. It takes that much energy. It's hugely expensive to run because you've got the fans and the cooling and obviously the electronics, which is slightly less odorous.
It's a very good point, because I remember when the Windsor tunnel first started, the full-scale tunnel in Chip Ganassi's. Is it Chip Ganassi's? No, sure. Gene Haas's, of course. Gene Haas's tunnel, but next to Ganassi. When it started, the lights used to flicker apparently initially from on the grid when the thing was running. Everybody's, what's going on here? Yeah. What's happened to the TV signal?
And the lake at McLaren is to cool the wind tunnel. They absorb a huge amount of energy, huge amount of staff, and then you've got to make all of those parts to go on the car, and that. Someone's got to design them, you've then got to 3D print them, someone's got to fit them and then run the time. It's hugely expensive. And, as much as you may have a set number of hours, you may not have the pounds, or dollars as it is, to utilise all of them.
I'd never thought of that.
Yeah. Now they should, and that should help them. But, it's strange because they are appear to be such a well-run team.
And what's the difference between their relationship with Ferrari and Haas's relationship with Ferrari, if any?
Sauber's relationship has always been fairly simplistic in terms of they have got the Ferrari power unit And they've now been getting the gearbox the past few years, which is something they held off for as long as they could because they wanted to develop their own gearbox and their own rear suspension. Now they get the gearbox cassette, but develop the carbon carrier that goes on the outside that they can have significantly different rear suspension to the Ferrari. That's really as far as the cooperation goes. So it's not like Haas that buy as much as they can from them and just kind of fill in the gaps themselves as the regulations demand. Sauber have always been very independent, and again, that's one of the things that must have been very attractive for Audi buying in. That is a team that can make everything. They can resurrect their gearbox manufacturing side of the sport quite rapidly, and they know what's needed for an F1 gearbox. Mix that with Audi's expertise in making all of their gearboxes they've had in Formula E, WEC, DTM, and everything else over the years. It's a good fit there. So they're not a team that are reliant massively on Ferrari.
Audi, interesting, eh? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, they're coming in as an engine supplier at the end of the day. Everybody's talking about.
Yeah,
team. What are you seeing it as an Audi team from here on?
Yeah, I have no inside information in particular, but I can't see Audi just turning up. Bearing in mind, the Red Bull deal that kind of fell flat because the group wanted to have so much control. It will be like going back to the BMW days for Sauber, where you have very much an overarching owner, someone running with them. Yeah, they may supply the engine in its entirety, but they will have their fingers and thumbs all over the rest of that car and the operation. Because Audi are fantastic at all that stuff, but don't want to invest in everything on day one.
And the 26 PU regulations in Formula One will have been something that Audi would be quite familiar with in terms of what
Audi were in the room
cars.
in the negotiations, as were other engine manufacturers and parties.
But what I mean is they've been playing around with a lot of that stuff in sports cars, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing on the 26 car that Audi haven't run previously. If you actually look at the performance of their front MGU from the WEC car, very similar performance, albeit different position in the car, to the one that's going to be the MGU K in 26. Very large, very powerful, 350 kilowatts. It's like 500 horsepower electric motor. It's the size of a kitchen roll. Tiny little thing, hugely powerful. Yeah, Audi have got all of the skills in that, but also, not just in making it, but deploying it. And the deployment and the strategy of using all of that electrical power is something that they've learned from Formula E and WEC, and it won't be left to the Sauber engineers to work that out. They'll be sitting there with Audi engineers, and it will be very hard to pick apart what is Audi, what is Sauber.
When and this is just a typical PW question, but when Colin Chapman and Keith Duckworth got together and said, let's do a stressed engine, let's make it a V8, let's call it over to you, Keith, and it was a Cosworth DFE, which became the most successful Formula One engine of all time. The FIA and the teams went out of their way to say, okay, but it can only be exclusive to Lotus for 1 year, then you're going to have to make it available to everybody else, otherwise it's going to ruin Formula One. Why is it now that nobody is saying that? Now it's actually considered to be a disadvantage, some might say, to be exclusive with a team. But I don't understand why, when the FIA put tyres out to tender, the potential second tyre company has to be able to supply 50% of the team in order to be even considered as a potential company. And yet Audi can come in and they can say, I'm just going to be with Sauber, nobody else, and we're going to be exclusive to them. It seems to be incongruous to me. Because what if that engine turns out to be unbelievably good, and they've got an exclusive with Sauber for 4 years? I suppose everyone's going to say, oh, well, that's great, it'll change everything around. But ultimately, that's not the way Formula One's always been. And I'm wondering why that philosophy has changed.
I've not read the regulations in a long time, but I think there is something in the regulations that means that an engine manufacturer has to be able to supply up to so many teams.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read that side of it because it's really just not that important.
I don't think so anymore.
It may have changed, but if Audi are having huge success with Sauber, with their engine, maybe there is a better chassis partner that would be a customer. Yeah. Maybe that would be the route they would take. It's hard to say.
You're saying it's up to Audi, but at the end of the day, I think it should be up to the sport, actually, to say that they must make it available if after year one, maybe, following precedent.
Again,
makes sense to me.
I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure the rules demand that if someone doesn't have an engine, Audi could be lent on to supply an engine.
Oh, well, that's an interesting point. If somebody doesn't have an engine,
Yeah, which isn't difficult to engineer, let's be honest. You just start calling it GP2 engine or bad mouthing it to everyone, and soon that relationship could possibly break down. But
yeah. Okay, so that's Alfa Romeo, and the car was edgy and it was inconsistent, but flashes of speed, and we hope they know what they're doing. Going into 23, regulations for 23, will that suit a team that's had this sort of edgy, inconsistent year, do you think? Or do you think it'll make it even more knife-edgy for them?
I don't think it will make any impact on their performance. You know, they're kind of, that middle grid area, are less sensitive to the changes. They've got to change their roll hoop. I've not read the detail of the words. Quite a few teams are going to have to change both the roll hoop. Every team is going to have to change their testing and how strong they make the whole setup there because of the Silverstone crash. I don't think that's going to be fundamental any impact on their performance. So yeah, I mean it's just down to how well they can run and operate the team, I think, is.
And when all's said and done, Joe did well to step out of that car. So all credit to everybody in Formula One involved in getting us to where we are today with safety.